Army driver Michael Everett left his base on a routine assignment, but he never arrived at his destination. His sudden disappearance baffled the entire town, leaving unanswered questions and haunting secrets. 33 years later, deep in a remote forest, his military vehicle was found completely intact, as if time itself had stood still. What happened to Michael Everett on that mysterious day, and why did it take 3 decades to uncover the truth? Hanover, New Hampshire, 1984. A town painted softly by autumn's touch, where leaves turned gently from green to gold and crimson, carpeting the streets like forgotten memories. Quiet homes lined neatly along winding roads, their windows glowing warmly at twilight, silently speaking stories of love, loss, and dreams. The air carried the delicate scent of burning wood and fresh-baked bread, mixing comfort with a hint of melancholy. Hanover was a place where nothing ever truly changed, yet beneath the calm, each person quietly nursed their own hidden sorrows. Michael Everett had known these streets his entire life. Born and raised in Hanover, his childhood was one marked by quiet resilience. His father passed when Michael was barely old enough to remember him clearly, and his older brother, Thomas, had quickly taken on the role of protector. Thomas was the kind of brother Michael idolized, a towering figure whose laughter filled rooms, whose bravery seemed unshakable, and whose strength was the anchor for their small family. But then Vietnam called, and Thomas never returned, leaving only an empty bedroom and a folded flag. From that day, their mother, Eleanor, never smiled quite the same way again. Yet she never faltered, raising Michael alone, teaching him about strength and kindness, about duty and sacrifice. Eleanor was a petite woman with gentle hands and eyes that had seen too much sorrow for one lifetime. Every evening she would sit quietly on the porch, watching the road, perhaps still waiting for Thomas's ghost to walk back home. Michael grew under her steady gaze, determined to be the son she deserved. Michael joined the army as soon as he was old enough, driven by the desire to honor his brother's sacrifice and bring some comfort to his mother's heart. He was neither a soldier of grandeur nor ambition. He was simply a dependable young man with a warm smile and unwavering sense of duty. Quickly recognized for his meticulous attention to detail and calm demeanor, Michael was assigned to be an army driver, a responsibility he took seriously and performed diligently. On November 14, 1984, Michael woke early, long before the sun cast its pale fingers through the misty streets of Hanover. He carefully buttoned his uniform, pausing only to gently brush a speck of dust off the shoulder patch that bore his rank. His routine was quiet and methodical, comforting in its predictability. Eleanor, wrapped in a knitted shawl against the chill, watched her son from the doorway, something in her heart tightening that she couldn't quite explain. "You all right, Mom?" Michael asked, noticing her gaze lingering. Eleanor smiled softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just be careful today, Michael." "I always am," he reassured her, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "I'll be home by supper." With that, he stepped into the crisp morning air, the door softly clicking shut behind him, unknowingly sealing the moment forever into Eleanor's memory. At Fort Claremont, Michael checked his paperwork, a routine delivery of supplies to a secondary base, a familiar and straightforward route. He greeted his fellow soldiers warmly, exchanging brief laughter and casual banter, a few jokes about the cold snap that had descended overnight. He climbed into his military vehicle, turning the ignition key with practiced ease, the engine humming to life reassuringly beneath him. As he drove away, Michael glanced briefly at his rearview mirror, watching the fort slowly fade behind him. The journey ahead was familiar. He had driven it countless times. He passed fields sleeping under a thin frost, their grasses shimmering gently in the pale morning light. Tall trees lined the winding road, their branches stretched towards the heavens, bare of leaves and solemn, silently standing guard over the secrets of the land. The hours ticked by slowly in Hanover. Eleanor busied herself with chores, though her mind continuously drifted toward thoughts of her son. As evening approached, neighbors passed by her home, exchanging greetings tinged with the silent understanding that comes from shared history and mutual respect. Yet as the sun began its slow descent, painting the horizon in shades of amber and violet, Eleanor found herself growing anxious. Michael was always punctual. Supper grew cold on the table, and silence stretched painfully through the house. By nightfall, her quiet anxiety had transformed into a sharp, painful worry. She stood by the window, staring down the long, empty road. Shadows stretched and twisted beneath the dim streetlights, and every sound, every gust of wind, held the cruel promise of Michael's return, yet he never appeared. The first inquiries came in quietly, then built steadily. Friends, soldiers, neighbors, all spoke with confusion and disbelief. Michael was a reliable young man, steadfast and careful. He would never abandon his duty. Something must have happened, something inexplicable, something wrong. The military quickly became involved, retracing Michael's route with meticulous precision. Soldiers combed the countryside, authorities checked every town, every farm, every back road Michael could have possibly taken. Yet the vehicle, Michael, and every trace of him had vanished completely, as though swallowed by the earth itself. Eleanor clung desperately to hope, even as the days turned to weeks. Friends visited frequently, offering comfort and condolences that felt hollow, whispered through sympathetic smiles and sad eyes. Investigations yielded nothing. Authorities, initially confident, now struggled to maintain their composure as their answers became increasingly vague. Theories arose quietly in the town's whispered conversations. Perhaps Michael had run away. Perhaps something sinister had occurred. No one knew, and the not knowing ate at the heart of the community like an open wound. Winter crept slowly into Hanover, snow blanketing the town gently, as if trying to cover the scars of uncertainty beneath layers of quiet white. Yet Eleanor stood every evening, resolutely watching that empty road, unable to accept that Michael might never return. Finally, after weeks of searching, Commander James Hartley himself decided to retrace the route Michael had taken, driven by guilt and a need for answers. It was early morning, the sky still heavy with the cold promise of snow, when Hartley drove slowly along the silent road, his eyes scanning carefully for any missed clues. He arrived at a familiar stretch, narrow and lined by ancient towering trees. Here the road twisted gently before straightening out once again. Hartley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. He stepped from his vehicle, his boots crunching softly in the fresh snow. The forest stood still around him, watching, waiting. The road before him was utterly empty. No skid marks, no debris, no signs of distress. Nothing but cold silence greeted him. Hartley felt a deep, unshakable sense of dread, his breath visible in the icy air as he whispered, "Where did you go, Michael?" Miles away, Eleanor remained, by her window, eyes fixed upon the lonely road, her heart heavy with the knowledge that something terrible had indeed happened. The silent waiting would stretch on indefinitely, a quiet vigil for a son lost somewhere between duty and destiny. Hanover, December 2017. The town had aged gracefully, much like an old photograph gently faded by sunlight. Its streets, once quiet and simple, had widened slightly, now touched by the soft hum of modern life. Old houses still stood proudly, their facades freshly painted, yet beneath the new layers, the memories of past sorrows remained. Shops had come and gone, leaving traces of their stories in storefront windows and faded signs. Hanover was a place caught somewhere between holding on to its past and cautiously embracing the present. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the chilly air, landing softly on rooftops and sidewalks, covering Hanover in a blanket of peaceful quiet. Christmas lights sparkled in the windows, and wreaths adorned every door, as though attempting to mask the town's deeper melancholy with a cheerful facade. But beneath this festive calm, the memories of Michael Everett's disappearance still lingered. Tucked away in quiet conversations and distant gazes, Ethan Hayes had grown up hearing stories of Michael Everett, whispered carefully by his grandfather in the warm glow of their living room fireplace. Ethan, now a young detective, carried those stories with him always. He was a man known for his Quick wit and playful charm, qualities he had used to smooth over awkward conversations and tense interrogations. With a perpetual half-smile and eyes filled with boyish curiosity, Ethan was a breath of fresh air in the police department. Yet beneath his light-hearted exterior lay a determination rooted deeply in his childhood fascination with the mystery of Michael Everett. On this particular morning, Ethan was sipping coffee at the small diner on Main Street, the warm cup pressed between his hands, chasing away the winter chill. He watched through the frosted window as the town slowly came alive. His thoughts wandered back to the stories of Michael, and how as a boy he had promised his grandfather he would someday unravel that mystery. A quiet promise that he intended to keep. Across the diner, sitting at a corner booth, Lila Montgomery observed him carefully, amusement dancing in her bright eyes. Lila, a journalist known for her sharp insights and sharper wit, had moved to Hanover several years earlier, drawn by its quiet charm and hidden stories. With her notebook always within reach, she collected snippets of life, piecing them together into compelling narratives. Though known for her ironic commentary and quick comebacks, Lila's heart softened for stories like Michael Everett's, tales woven with loss and longing. She approached Ethan's table confidently, sliding into the chair across from him without waiting for an invitation. "Still chasing ghosts, detective?" she asked, eyebrow arched, a playful challenge in her voice. Ethan looked up, his grin widening instantly. "Only when the ghosts chase me first," he replied, lifting his coffee cup in greeting. Lila leaned forward, her voice lowering just slightly. "Funny you should mention that. I got a call this morning. A hunter out near White Pine Forest found something that might interest you." Ethan's heart quickened slightly. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What exactly did he find?" Lila paused dramatically, leaning even closer. "A military vehicle. An old one, perfectly preserved, hidden away in the snow like it's been waiting for someone all these years." Within the hour, Ethan and Lila were making their way along the icy roads toward White Pine Forest. The snowfall had grown heavier, wrapping the woods in a serene white silence. The forest loomed tall and solemn around them, the trees guarding secrets of their own. Ethan navigated carefully, eyes sharp with anticipation. At the forest edge, the hunter, a gruff older man named Hank, waited patiently. His heavy boots crunched in the snow as he led Ethan and Lila deeper into the woods, recounting how he stumbled upon the vehicle early that morning. His voice was steady but held a note of quiet awe, as though he'd witnessed something nearly impossible. "It's just over here," Hank finally said, gesturing toward a clearing ahead. There, nestled among snow-covered trees, sat Michael Everett's vehicle, as untouched as the day it had vanished. Ethan approached cautiously, his heart hammering in his chest, breath visible in the cold air. Lila circled around slowly, taking notes, her eyes scanning every detail carefully. "Unbelievable," Ethan murmured softly, opening the driver's door, carefully, as if afraid the vehicle itself might vanish again into thin air. The interior was untouched by time, pristine as if awaiting orders. Ethan ran his fingers across the dashboard, feeling a strange connection to Michael, the man whose story had captivated him since childhood. Lila watched him closely, a gentle smile forming on her lips. "Looks like your ghost is real after all," she said quietly. Ethan nodded slowly, searching under the seat and around the interior for anything out of place. Just as he began to believe there was nothing else, his fingers brushed against something wedged beneath the driver's seat. Carefully, he pulled it free. A faded photograph. He held it gently, brushing off a fine layer of dust. In the image stood Michael Everett, younger and smiling warmly, alongside an unknown man whose face was unfamiliar yet intriguing. The background showed unmistakably the old bridge near Connolly River, a spot known for whispered legends and midnight meetings. Ethan's eyes met Lila's, both feeling the weight of this discovery. The forest around them grew eerily quiet, holding its breath as they realized they had stumbled onto a hidden chapter of Michael's story, one long buried beneath decades of silence and snow. Lila broke the silence first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who's the other man?" Ethan shook his head slowly, eyes locked on the mysterious figure. "I don't know, but whoever he is, He might be the key to understanding what happened that day. The wind rustled gently through the trees, carrying with it echoes of forgotten conversations. Ethan looked once more at the photograph, the old bridge looming silently behind the two men, as though urging them to return to the spot where secrets awaited discovery. The path forward was suddenly clear. This photo wasn't just a memory, it was a clue, pointing directly toward the past Ethan had vowed to uncover. With a silent promise renewed, Ethan glanced at Lila, determination shining in his eyes. They would return to that bridge, and perhaps there, beneath its aging timbers and whispered legends, Michael Everett's story would finally begin to speak. Hanover held its breath beneath the weight of snow, the old Connolly River running softly like whispers beneath ice-covered banks. Its waters murmured secrets to those willing to listen, carrying the faded voices of past tragedies downstream. The old wooden bridge that spanned the river had stood sentinel for nearly a century, weathered and gray, worn smooth by years of quiet service. It was a relic, a silent witness to countless stories, standing stoically above waters that held the town's forgotten memories. Ethan and Lila arrived at the bridge early, stepping carefully over the frozen ground. The air was crisp, biting gently at their faces, and they felt a certain reverence for this place. Old townsfolk spoke of this bridge as if it were alive, guarding Hanover's past like a quiet, patient keeper of secrets. Lila tugged her scarf tighter around her neck, glancing around cautiously. Her eyes, always alert, caught the subtle marks of history etched into every plank and railing. "You know," Ethan remarked lightly, breaking the solemn quiet. "When I was a kid, everyone said this bridge was haunted." Lila smirked gently, casting him a sideways glance. "I can imagine you out here at night, daring your friends to cross it alone." "Exactly," Ethan chuckled, breath forming little clouds in the chill. "I never had the guts myself, but I always loved a good ghost story." Their laughter echoed softly around them, briefly warming the silence. Yet beneath their humor lay tension, the unspoken weight of their search growing heavier with every step. Carefully they began their meticulous search, inspecting each corner, each plank. The bridge groaned softly under their footsteps, as if reluctant to reveal its secrets. Ethan crouched down, examining faded initials carved by lovers long since forgotten, memories etched into wood that would outlive their passions. "Hey, Ethan, come look at this," Lila called quietly, pointing to a small hidden space beneath a loose plank. Ethan hurried over, kneeling beside her as she carefully lifted the board away, revealing a hollow underneath. Inside lay the fragile remains of papers, edges browned and worn, corners eaten away by time. Ethan carefully extracted them, handling each fragment as if it might crumble to dust at any moment. "These look military," Ethan murmured, his voice tense with surprise. He traced faint official seals and fragmented lines of typewritten text, partially obscured by water damage and age. Lila leaned in closer, eyes narrowing in concentration. "Look here, what are these markings?" She pointed to symbols drawn carefully on the paper's margins, shapes unfamiliar and unsettling. Ethan shook his head slowly, unease rising in his chest. "I don't recognize them, but they feel important. Maybe coded. Military operations sometimes use strange symbols." Their voices had grown quieter, as if aware they were stepping carefully around buried truths. The river's quiet murmurs seemed to grow louder, pressing them gently, urging caution. "We should talk to someone who might know more," Lila suggested. Her tone was cautious but determined. "Someone from that time who knew Michael personally." Ethan sighed deeply, looking toward the horizon, already suspecting who they must visit. "Richard Faulkner. He was Michael's commanding officer. Retired now, still lives just outside of town." Faulkner's home sat on the edge of Hanover, modest and quiet, surrounded by tall pines that stood guard like silent soldiers. He greeted them stiffly, his eyes cold but polite. Faulkner was a stern man, his features hardened by years of discipline and secrets. Inside, they sat uncomfortably in his small, impeccably neat living room. Faulkner offered coffee, his movements precise, each action carefully measured. He regarded Ethan and Lila cautiously, eyes sharp with distrust. "So, you're digging up Everett's case again," Faulkner remarked, voice curt. "Thought people had moved on." "Some stories don't fade so easily," Lila responded smoothly, her voice polite yet firm. "Michael's story deserves closure." Faulkner sighed deeply, sitting back in his chair. "Michael was a good soldier, dependable, disciplined. His disappearance was an embarrassment, something we all wished we could forget. But you didn't forget." Ethan pressed gently, watching Faulkner carefully. "Did you?" Faulkner hesitated, eyes flickering. Away briefly. There were whispers, rumors, nothing substantial. Ethan leaned forward, placing the paper fragments carefully on the table. "These were found under the old Connolly Bridge. Do you recognize them?" Faulkner visibly stiffened, eyes betraying a flicker of recognition before he forced calm back into his voice. "Never seen these before, probably meaningless, junk kids left behind." Lila watched him intently, sensing his discomfort. "Mr. Faulkner, these symbols look military, perhaps coded. Could they relate to something secret?" Faulkner's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm retired. I've left secrets behind. If you want my advice, you should do the same." The tension in the room thickened. Ethan and Lila exchanged quick glances, silently understanding they had touched upon something Faulkner wanted hidden. After several long seconds, Ethan leaned back, forcing his voice casual. "Michael trusted you. His mother trusted you. We only want to understand what happened that day." Faulkner hesitated, the smallest hint of regret briefly shadowing his face. "Michael made choices. Sometimes the truth is too painful. Let the dead rest." Ethan's eyes hardened slightly, but he remained calm. "We can't. Not when those choices still haunt people who deserve peace." Faulkner shook his head slowly, avoiding eye contact. "I'm sorry. There's nothing more. I can tell you." They stood, knowing they had reached the limits of Faulkner's willingness to talk. He escorted them to the door, the silence heavy and uncomfortable. Stepping outside, Ethan turned back briefly. "If you remember anything at all, please call us." Faulkner nodded curtly, shutting the door firmly behind them. Ethan and Lila walked slowly back toward their car, both deep in thought. "Do you believe him?" Lila finally asked quietly, breaking the heavy silence. "Not for a second," Ethan replied firmly. "He knows more than he's saying. He's scared." "Question is," Lila pondered aloud, "what could frighten a man like him after all these years?" They drove away slowly, both aware that they had opened a door they might not easily close. Inside the house, Faulkner stood silently, heart pounding heavily in his chest. He stared at the closed door, waiting until he was certain Ethan and Lila were gone. Then, with shaking hands, he lifted an old telephone receiver, dialing carefully. It rang several times before a voice answered on the other end, low and familiar. "They've found it," Faulkner whispered urgently, voice trembling with anxiety. "We need to talk. Now." The quiet house seemed to close in around him, the past rising like a storm he could no longer outrun. The soft quiet of Hanover was slowly unraveling, threads of hidden truths pulling at the edges of Ethan and Lila's lives. Winter held the town in a silent grip, the snow glittering beautifully, yet hiding darkness beneath its gentle surface. Days after their tense conversation with Richard Faulkner, Ethan found himself pacing restlessly around his small office, unsettled by the retired lieutenant's evasive behavior and mysterious phone call. Lila, ever watchful, leaned against the doorway, observing Ethan's agitation with quiet amusement. "If you keep pacing like that, you'll wear a hole right through the floor," she remarked dryly. Ethan stopped abruptly, sighing deeply. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly troubled. "Faulkner knows more than he's letting on. Whatever he's hiding, it scares him." Lila stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder. "We'll figure it out, Ethan. The truth is there. We just need to know where to look." Ethan nodded slowly, determination hardening his features. "Military archives. The old base at Fort Claremont. They might still have records from Michael's time." By late afternoon, Ethan and Lila found themselves inside a cold, dimly lit room at Fort Claremont, surrounded by stacks of dusty boxes, each one heavy with years of neglect. The scent of old paper filled the air, mixing with the faint chill from poorly insulated windows. They sifted quietly through endless documents, yellowed pages crackling beneath their careful fingers. Hours passed in quiet diligence before Lila's voice broke the silence, tense with excitement. "Ethan, come look at this." She held up a thin folder marked, "Classified, Chemical Operations." Ethan took it carefully, heart racing as he flipped slowly through faded pages filled with cryptic references and partial names. His eyes widened as realization dawned. "This was happening right here in Hanover," he whispered incredulously, disbelief clear in his voice. "Military secrets being smuggled out. Chemical weapons data sold to foreign agents. It was all happening around the time Michael disappeared." Lila exhaled slowly, clearly shaken. If Michael found out, Ethan, maybe he wasn't just a random victim. He could have discovered something he wasn't supposed to. Ethan nodded grimly. That would explain Faulkner's fear. The silence between them grew heavier, the weight of what they had uncovered pressing down on their shoulders. It was no longer just about solving a decades-old mystery. It had become something deeper, darker, more dangerous. Over the following days, the air around Ethan and Lila changed subtly. An invisible tension hovered close, casting shadows into previously safe corners. Small signs began to appear, strange phone calls with no voice on the other end, anonymous notes left tucked beneath windshield wipers, warnings written in careful handwriting. "Stop digging." One evening, after a particularly unsettling call, Ethan and Lila sat in his small apartment, sharing uneasy glances over cups of cooling coffee. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily past the window, oblivious to their worries. "You ever regret digging up old ghosts?" Ethan asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila managed a weak smile, shrugging slightly. "If I wanted easy stories, I'd write about town bake sales. Less threatening, and they usually come with free pie." Ethan chuckled softly, the tension easing briefly. "I never thought Hanover had secrets this big." "Every town has secrets," Lila said gently. "Ours just happened to involve national security." They laughed softly, but the momentary levity faded quickly. Ethan stared deeply into his cup, troubled. "I keep wondering if we've crossed a line. Maybe Faulkner's right. Maybe some truths are better left buried." Lila reached across, taking Ethan's hand in hers, offering reassurance in the simple warmth of her touch. "People deserve the truth, Ethan. Eleanor deserves it. Michael deserves it." He squeezed her hand gently, drawing strength from her resolve. "You're right. Whatever happens, we see this through." Days passed quietly, the tension slowly becoming routine, like an unwelcome guest who refused to leave. Ethan and Lila worked tirelessly, piecing together names and places, following leads that twisted into darker corners. It became increasingly clear that certain high-ranking individuals within the military had much to lose if the truth surfaced. Late one evening, returning from another fruitless search, Ethan and Lila walked slowly toward Ethan's car, parked beneath a dimly lit street lamp. Snow had begun falling heavily again, blanketing the world in muffled silence. "You know," Lila teased lightly, brushing snow from her shoulders, "I used to think small towns were boring." Ethan grinned despite his exhaustion. "Well, if you want excitement, there's always city traffic." She laughed, shaking her head. "I think I prefer the spies and intrigue." They approached Ethan's car, their laughter fading into comfortable silence. Ethan reached for the handle but paused suddenly, noticing something odd, a faint metallic scent in the air. "Wait," Ethan said sharply, holding up a hand. His eyes narrowed cautiously. "Something feels off." He knelt, carefully examining. Beneath the car, using the faint glow of his phone to illuminate the undercarriage, his heart raced, dread pooling heavily in his chest. "Ethan," Lila's voice was tight with concern. "Get back," Ethan warned urgently, voice strained. He stood slowly, his face pale in the dim light. Someone tampered with the car, cut the brake lines. Lila's eyes widened in alarm, her breathing quickening. They're not just trying to scare us anymore. Ethan scanned their surroundings, suddenly aware of every shadow, every distant noise. The quiet snowfall felt oppressive, each flake whispering danger. "Whoever did this," Ethan said firmly, fighting back fear, "they're watching us closely. They know we're onto something big." Lila stepped closer, her eyes blazing defiantly. "Then we know we're close, Ethan. They wouldn't take this risk unless we posed a real threat." He nodded grimly, determination hardening his gaze. "You're right, but we have to be careful. Next time, it might not just be a warning." Together, they stood silently, the sabotaged car between them. A stark reminder that their investigation had stirred powerful enemies. The snow continued to fall gently, covering the danger in soft white, as if the town itself hoped to forget the shadows lurking beneath. In that moment, Ethan knew their lives had changed irrevocably. The line between truth and safety had vanished, leaving only the uncertain path forward. Whatever secrets lay hidden, they would find them. But as they stood together in the cold night, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was waiting patiently, watching carefully, ready to silence them at any cost. After narrowly escaping the sabotage, Ethan and Lila felt the world around them shift irrevocably, as if the comfortable illusions they'd lived within had suddenly shattered like thin ice beneath their feet. Danger, once an abstract threat, whispered in anonymous notes and late-night phone calls, had become sharply, undeniably real. Yet rather than deterring them, the attack had strengthened their resolve, fueling a quiet fire of determination. Days later, as Hanover slept beneath a thick coat of snow, Ethan and Lila returned to the old archives, sifting through decades of forgotten whispers. Their conversations became softer, careful exchanges of hopeful theories and quiet fears, spoken as if the walls themselves might betray them. Through endless hours, they found small clues that slowly shaped themselves into answers. Their search soon uncovered references to a remote cabin deep within the dense solitude of White Pine Forest, so isolated it seemed deliberately hidden from the world. Local whispers spoke of a family that lived quietly there, withdrawn from society, their past shrouded in mystery. Rumors spoke in poetic riddles of shadows in the trees, faces glimpsed through curtains drawn tightly shut, a silent refuge protecting its own secrets fiercely. Intrigued yet cautious, Ethan and Lila decided to find the cabin, aware they were moving closer to truth someone desperately wanted hidden. Before dawn broke one frosty morning, they set out quietly, the world around them still cloaked in shadows and sleep. Snow crunched beneath their footsteps, each sound like a whispered promise of discovery and danger. As they walked, Ethan glanced sideways at Lila, quietly observing the way the pale winter light caught her hair, illuminating her features gently. Over weeks of shared purpose and danger, his feelings for her had deepened subtly, a quiet recognition now impossible to ignore. The realization startled him, yet offered comfort amid the uncertainty. Lila caught his gaze, her smile soft and knowing. "Something on your mind, detective?" "Just wondering how we got here," Ethan admitted quietly, his breath forming little clouds in the crisp air. "Feels like yesterday we were drinking coffee, teasing each other about ghosts. Now we're chasing secrets people might kill to protect." Lila nodded slowly, her eyes serious yet kind. "Life has a funny way of pulling us into stories we never expected. Maybe we're exactly where we're supposed to be." Ethan smiled faintly, warmth spreading despite the cold morning air. "Glad you're here with me, Lila. Couldn't do this alone." She paused, turning to face him directly, her voice gentle. "You don't have to. I'm here until the end." Silence fell comfortably between them, a quiet acknowledgement of trust and something deeper left unsaid. After hours of walking, the forest thinned slightly, revealing a narrow trail, barely visible through snow-laden branches. They followed carefully, the stillness around them growing heavier, almost oppressive. Soon, a small cabin emerged from the mist ahead, nestled among towering pines. It stood quietly, its worn wooden walls weathered gray, windows dark and curtains drawn. Snow blanketed the roof gently, as though nature itself had woven a protective covering around its secrets. As they approached, Ethan felt a strange sense of reverence, as if stepping onto sacred ground. "This place feels forgotten by time," he murmured softly, gazing at the cabin with cautious awe. Lila stepped closer, examining the area carefully. Or maybe it remembers everything and chooses silence. Together they approached the door, its wood worn smooth by years of quiet existence. Ethan reached carefully for the handle, breath catching slightly as it turned smoothly, welcoming them inside with silent permission. The interior was dimly lit by faint rays slipping through, cracks in the curtains, dust motes dancing slowly in the air. Furniture sat patiently beneath thin layers of dust, evidence of careful care now abandoned. The silence inside was thick, broken only by their careful footsteps and the soft creaking of old wooden floors. Lila moved quietly toward a bookshelf, filled with worn volumes, tracing titles faded nearly beyond recognition. Ethan explored carefully, every step revealing pieces of lives long past. Photographs, yellowed by time, lined the mantelpiece, faces smiling gently, holding quiet stories of happiness and sorrow. As Ethan reached a small bedroom tucked in the back, his breath caught sharply. On a small table lay a pair of military dog tags, rusted yet unmistakably authentic. Heart pounding, he examined them closely, fingers tracing familiar engraved letters. Everett, Michael J. Lila. Ethan's voice trembled slightly. He was here. She joined him quickly, eyes widening as she took the tags carefully, recognition dawning vividly. Michael survived after the disappearance, but how? Ethan searched the room carefully, each movement driven by urgency. Near the bed stood an old chest, its metal hinges rusted but still sturdy. With careful effort, they opened it slowly, their hearts beating faster as they glimpsed its contents. Inside were stacks of letters, pages yellowed but carefully preserved, each bearing careful handwriting, a handwriting Ethan instantly recognized from military documents. Michael Everett's handwriting. Lila picked one letter carefully, unfolding it with reverent caution. Her voice trembled slightly as she read aloud. December 12th, 1984. If anyone ever finds these letters, know I am alive. The truth is more dangerous than I imagined. I had to disappear to protect my mother, to protect Hanover. The men involved are powerful, but they must not win. I can only hope someday someone will uncover the truth. If you're reading this, please forgive my silence. It was necessary. Michael. The words hung in the air heavily, their meaning profound and undeniable. Ethan and Lila shared a glance filled with shock and determination, understanding that their search had taken a profound, irrevocable turn. Michael Everett hadn't simply vanished. He had chosen exile to shield those he loved from secrets powerful enough to destroy lives. Ethan's voice was steady, solemn as he spoke. Michael chose to disappear. He knew the danger and faced it alone. Lila nodded quietly, her expression somber, yet filled with resolve. We owe it to him to finish what he started, Ethan, to reveal the truth. They stood quietly, feeling the weight of history pressing gently on their shoulders, the quiet bravery of a man who had sacrificed everything to protect others. Outside, snow continued falling gently, covering the cabin and forest in quiet, respectful white. Inside, Ethan and Lila stood together, bound by shared purpose, strengthened by growing trust, and emboldened by a deeper, undeniable bond. As they carefully gathered the letters, determined to honor Michael's silent courage, the shadows of the past watched quietly from corners of the cabin, secrets finally willing to speak after decades of silence. The truth had found its voice again, and they would ensure it would no longer be silenced. The letters Ethan and Lila held spoke quietly, yet powerfully, the faded ink whispering stories of bravery hidden in silence. Sitting together inside the humble cabin, they read Michael Everett's careful handwriting, feeling as though they were peering into his very soul. Each letter painted a picture, layer by layer, revealing the truth of that distant morning in 1984. Michael had begun his day innocently, unaware that within hours, his entire life would change forever. He had stumbled inadvertently upon a secret so grave, so dangerous, it threatened the very people he had sworn to protect. In quiet prose, Michael detailed his discovery, a clandestine exchange he witnessed beneath the old Connolly Bridge. Military, officers, men he had trusted, handing over sensitive chemical weapons documents to shadowy figures. Fear, sharp and sudden, pierced him as he realized he had become an accidental witness to treason. Michael's first instinct had been to run, to alert authorities, but instinct was quickly tempered by reason. These men were his superiors, powerful, dangerous individuals whose reach extended far beyond the quiet town of Hanover. He wrote vividly of the crushing weight of choice. The moment he knew he could not expose what he'd seen without placing his mother and his community in harm's way. Michael, described in his own humble words, had always seen himself as ordinary, never heroic, yet confronted by darkness, he made a silent, courageous decision to vanish, sacrificing his own identity to shield those he loved. He detailed his escape vividly. The hurried journey into the dense forest, every step away from the road, a step further from the life he knew. He left his vehicle hidden carefully among the trees, hoping someday it might lead someone back to his story. Alone, cold and injured from an intense confrontation in those snowy woods, Michael stumbled forward until, barely conscious, he reached the cabin, a place of refuge, unknown and untouched by the eyes of his pursuers. The family who found Michael had lived quietly on the margins of society, indifferent to town gossip, their own past cloaked in mystery. In gentle, compassionate prose, Michael described their kindness, how they took him in, treating his wounds without question, never pressing for explanations he could not safely provide. For years he lived in anonymity, supported by their quiet generosity, his existence reduced to whispers and shadows, though his heart yearned endlessly for the mother he left behind. The letters were filled with quiet longing, silent apologies, and hopeful dreams that one day, perhaps, the truth might find its way home. Ethan and Lila read each carefully preserved line with growing reverence, understanding finally the magnitude of Michael's quiet courage, the profound sacrifice hidden behind decades of silence. Days later, on a clear, crisp afternoon, the town of Hanover gathered solemnly in the central square. Word of Michael's story had spread, carried softly by whispers and conversations filled with wonder and sadness. Faces of those who had known him, and many who had only heard his name, waited in respectful silence, breath visible in the chilly air. Eleanor stood near the front, her eyes holding quiet strength, tempered by years of patient waiting. Ethan stepped forward, Lila at his side, and together they began to speak, voices steady yet filled with emotion. They recounted Michael's words, his brave decisions, his silent battles fought in isolation. As the narrative unfolded, Hanover seemed to breathe deeply, exhaling decades of quiet grief, releasing long-held uncertainty into the open sky. Eleanor's tears flowed silently, her eyes glistening not with sorrow alone, but with profound pride and relief. Her son, always a hero to her heart, was now honored openly by the town he loved enough to leave behind. She understood finally, deeply, that Michael's silence had been an act of courage beyond measure. When Ethan and Lila finished speaking, quiet applause began slowly, growing steadily until the entire town echoed with respect and gratitude. The sound filled the square, reverberating gently against buildings, rising into the sky like a collective sigh of relief and admiration. In the days following the ceremony, Hanover began to heal. The revelations led to investigations, uncovering the corruption Michael had sacrificed everything to hide from. Justice arrived quietly but firmly, bringing closure and peace to a community that had carried its doubts and fears far too long. Life slowly returned to a gentle rhythm, and the memories of Michael Everett were spoken openly now, a story of sacrifice and silent strength shared proudly. His name found its rightful place in the town's collective memory, etched into hearts and quietly honored in everyday conversations. One evening, as twilight painted Hanover's sky with soft hues of pink and orange, Ethan and Lila stood together, overlooking the town from a quiet hilltop. Below, lights began to glow warmly in windows, streets peaceful once more beneath a thin layer of fresh snow. Ethan reached quietly for Lila's hand, fingers intertwining naturally, comfortably. "It's strange," Ethan began softly. "Michael lived so long in silence, yet his story spoke louder than anything else in this town." Lila nodded gently, her eyes reflecting quiet understanding. "Sometimes silence holds the greatest courage. He gave Hanover a gift we didn't even know we needed." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, turning to face her. The quiet strength he'd found in Michael's story mirrored clearly in his eyes. "I think Michael brought us together in a way. Maybe that was his last gift." Lila smiled softly, leaning slightly into him. "I'm glad he did." Together they stood quietly, the gentle wind carrying softly around them, whispering through bare branches. Below them, Hanover stretched peacefully, the town breathing easily again after decades of quiet grief. Shadows of past sorrows still lingered, but they had softened, carried gently away by the truth finally revealed. As Ethan and Lila watched the lights twinkling gently, each window below holding stories of lives touched by Michael's courage, they felt peace settling softly around them. Michael's story had not only changed the town, it had reshaped their own lives, quietly bringing them together in shared purpose and profound understanding. The breeze picked up gently, swirling softly around them, lifting strands of Lila's hair as she leaned comfortably against Ethan's shoulder. Together they stood quietly, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of their journey settling peacefully into memory. As they watched the quiet, familiar town below, the last whispers of Michael Everett's story gently floated away, carried softly by the wind into the endless sky.